The wagon wheel caught the edge of the frozen rut, and the whole rig lurched sideways before anyone could shout a warning. Sera didn't fall so much as get thrown. One moment she was gripping the sideboard with both hands, the next she was in the air, and then the ground came up hard against her shoulder, and her cheek scraped against something cold and wet, and she lay still for a moment, listening to the sound of the horses screaming, and the driver cursing, and the wheels grinding back onto the road. Nobody stopped. She heard the wagon keep moving. She heard it slow. Just slightly. Just enough that she knew someone had looked back. And then she heard it keep going until the sound disappeared into the tree line. And she was left alone on a logging road, somewhere north of Kamloops, with nothing but a carpet bag that had landed 6 feet away from her, and a wool coat that was already soaking through at the shoulder, where she'd hit the ground. The sky was the color of old pewter, the kind of sky that means business. She got up slowly. Her left ankle was not broken, but it didn't feel right either, and when she put weight on it, the pain climbed up to her knee in a way that made her teeth press together. The bag was still closed. She limped to it and checked. 2 dresses, a pair of stockings, a small tin of biscuits she'd bought in Cache Creek, and the envelope with what remained of her late husband's insurance settlement, $46 and some cents, which was both more money than she'd had in years and not nearly enough to start over on. The trees were Douglas's fir, black-green and enormous, pressing in from both sides. The road went north and south, and she didn't know which direction the wagon had come from anymore. Her sense of direction had been rattled loose with everything else. She stood there for a long moment. The cold settled around her like a wet wool blanket, present, heavy, the kind that doesn't lift. There had been a sign back at the last fork. She hadn't read it carefully, because she'd been watching the mountains, because she'd always loved mountains from a safe distance, from windows. From the pages of books she borrowed from the library on Granville Street, where she had lived for 6 years in a small apartment above a tailor's shop, and worked as a typesetter for a weekly newspaper, and thought, for a while, that this was enough. It had been enough, until it wasn't, until Emery came into her life, and married her, and then left it again, 18 months later, with a cough that started small and became enormous, and took him in March, when the snow was still on the ground, and left her with the apartment lease due a stack of his debts she hadn't known about, and the $46 in a soaked envelope on an unnamed logging road in the interior of British Columbia. She had been going north to stay with a cousin in Prince George. That had been the plan. The wagon was meant to take her as far as the next proper town, where she could catch a freight stage. She started walking north. Or what she thought was north. The first hour was not so bad. The ankle held, if she was careful. The road was rough but clear of ice in the middle, where the horses had gone through. She kept her eyes on the tree line, and told herself stories about what the next town would have. A stove, a chair that didn't move, soup with something real in it. The second hour the wind came down from the mountains. She had not known wind could have a sound like that, like something being torn. It came through the firs and lifted snow off the branches in long white sheets, and the temperature dropped fast enough that she felt it in her back teeth. She pulled the coat tighter, but the coat was already wet, and wet wool holds cold the same way it holds warmth, and she was running out of warmth to hold. She didn't hear the cabin until she almost walked into the fence. It was a post fence, rough cut, running alongside the road where the trees thinned slightly. Beyond it, maybe 40 yards back, was a structure, low, log-built, with a roof that had been added onto at some point on the south side, and smoke coming from a stone chimney in a thin grey thread that meant there was a fire going, a small fire, conserved. Someone deliberate was tending it. There was a horse in the enclosure beside the cabin, a big roan with a winter coat, heavy enough to make it look twice its proper size. It turned its head and looked at her without alarm, which was the most reassuring thing she had seen all day. She pushed through the gate. The door opened before she knocked. The man standing in it had to turn slightly sideways to fit through the frame. He was carrying a rifle, not raised, just carried, the way some men carry a cup of coffee. Like it was an extension of his hand, and he looked at her with an expression that was not surprise exactly. More like the look of a man doing a calculation he hadn't expected to need. He was somewhere in his middle 40s, dark hair shot through with grey, a beard that had not been tended to since probably September, and eyes the colour of old creek ice, pale grey-green, clear and not unfriendly, but not warm either. He was wearing a canvas work shirt, no coat, and did not appear to notice the temperature at all. He looked at her. He looked at the bag. He looked at the direction she'd come from. "Roads washed out south of here," he said. "2 days ago." "I came from the south," she said. "I know." He stepped back and held the door open, and she went inside because what else was there to do? The cold had made the decision for her. The cabin was one room with a loft. It smelled like wood smoke and pine sap and something animal. Hides, she realized, looking at the wall beside the door where 3 cured pelts hung on wooden pegs. Beaver, she thought, though she had never seen a beaver pelt up close and could have been wrong. The floor was plank, hand-laid, and the gaps had been filled with what looked like moss packed tight. A table. 2 chairs that didn't match. A cook stove against the north wall with a cast-iron pot on it that was the source of whatever she had smelled from the road. Something with salt meat in it. Something real. She stood in the middle of the room and dripped. He set the rifle against the wall and went to the stove without looking at her again, and came back with a tin mug of something hot. He held it out. She took it. It was spruce tea, bitter, slightly resinous, the kind of thing her grandmother would have made. She had not had it since she was a child in Chilliwack. She drank it. "Your horse go lame," he said. "I was on a wagon," she said. "It went without me." He absorbed this the way he seemed to absorb most things, with a brief stillness, a small adjustment of something behind his eye, and then continued. It wasn't quite a question. "Prince George," she said. "I have family there. That's a long way from here." "How far?" he told her. She sat down in one of the chairs without asking permission, because her ankle had been waiting for this and was no longer. She set the mug willing to wait. She set the mug on the table. The warmth from the stove was working its way into the left side of her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. When she opened them, he was watching her from across the room with the same expression. "The calculation one. I'll pay for the night," she said. "I have money." "Road won't clear for a week," he said. "Maybe longer. Snow up top's been moving." "A week," she said. "Maybe longer." She thought about $46. She thought about Emery's debts, which she was still responsible for under the law regardless of what she thought was fair. She thought about the cousin in Prince George who expected her, and who she had written to explain her situation in terms that were, she now recognized, somewhat optimistic. "What's your name?" she said. He told her. Cass. Just the one name, offered like a fact, nothing attached to it. "I'm Sera," she said. "Sera Lennox." He nodded as if she had confirmed something, and went back to the stove. She slept in the loft on a bedroll that smelled like cedar, and something else she couldn't identify. Not unpleasant. The fire banked low overnight, and in the morning the inside of the window glass had a thin rime of ice at the corners. She lay still and listened. Below, she could hear the stove being opened, the knock of a log being added, the small domestic percussion of a man living alone who had found his rhythm. She came down at first light, and he had already been out. The water bucket was full, freshly broken from ice. There were 2 cups on the table, and the coffee pot was on the stove, and this small thing, 2 cups, when he had been alone, caught at something in her chest that she chose not to examine. "I can earn my keep," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "Tell me what needs doing." The first day he showed her how to check the water situation. Where the well was, where the hatchet for ice-breaking hung, which bucket was for drinking and which for the animals. He showed her the wood pile and the axe, and she took the axe and split enough wood to last 3 days, and he watched this from across the yard with his arms crossed, and she could not read his expression at all. The second day she asked about the hides on the wall. "Trapping?" she said. "Trapping," he said. "Is there more work in it? The processing?" He looked at her for a long time. "You know how to flesh a hide?" "I know how to learn," she said. Something shifted in him, barely, a fraction of a degree in the direction of something she might eventually call approval. He brought out a beaver hide that had been soaking and laid it over the wooden beam he used as a fleshing beam, and showed her, once, quickly, without commentary, how the scraper moved, what angle, what pressure. His hands were large and very sure. He did not narrate what he was doing. He just did it, and expected her to watch. She watched. She ruined the first hide, not completely, but partially, catching an edge wrong and thinning section in of the leather that he took back without anger, examined, and set aside without a word. She did better on the second. On the third, she didn't tear anything, and he said, without looking up from his own work, "You're getting the angle." She didn't say anything. She kept working. But something in her chest did a complicated thing that took her a moment to name. It was pride. The storm came on the 4th day. She had felt it before she saw it, a pressure change, a smell in the air like iron, the roan horse moving restless in the enclosure, circling in the way horses circle when something is coming that they understand better than people do. Cass had felt it too. By mid-morning he had brought in wood enough to last 4 days, stacked tight against the interior wall. He filled every vessel that would hold water. He brought the horse into the lean-to. He did all of this without explanation, and she followed and helped, without asking for one. By noon, the sky had gone the color of a bruised thumb, and by mid-afternoon the snow was coming sideways. By dark, they could not see the fence from the window. The cabin was small. She had not thought much about the smallness until they were both inside it with nowhere to go. He sat at the table and worked on a piece of harness that needed mending, stitching, careful and repetitive, and she sat on the other side with a book she had pulled from a small shelf near the stove. 3 books, all of them worn. A surveying manual, a book of scripture, cover separated from the spine, and a collection of folk tales from somewhere in the British Isles, the kind of book that had been read many times by someone who didn't seem the type. She read. He stitched. The fire talked to itself. "The book," she said after a while. He looked up. "The folk tales, I wouldn't have expected it." He considered this for a moment, the way he considered most things, fully, without hurry. "My mother's," he said. She didn't push further. She went back to the book, but she noticed that he had gone back to his work with something different in the set of his shoulders. Looser, maybe, as if something had been allowed rather than asked. The storm lasted 3 days. She learned things in those 3 days that she had not expected to learn. She learned that he had come to this part of the province from somewhere in the Maritimes, 15 years ago, alone, and had built the cabin and the trapping operation over the first 2 winters, without assistance from anyone. She learned that he had been married once, briefly, and that the woman had gone back east, and he had not tried to follow. He told her this, the way a person reads an item from a list, without inflection, but she noticed that he told it to the fire rather than to her, and she understood that this was not nothing. She told him about Emery. She had not told the full version to anyone, because the full version contained things that didn't reflect well on her, how she had known something was wrong with the marriage 6 months in, how she had stayed anyway, because leaving felt like admitting a failure, how the grief she felt when he died was real but not entirely uncomplicated. Cass listened to all of this without comment. He didn't offer comfort or judgment. He just listened with his full attention, in the complete way of a man who is not also thinking about what he is going to say next. When she was finished, he said, "Sounds like you did what you could with what you had." She sat with that for a while, I don't know if that's true, she said. Usually isn't, he said. Still counts. She thought about Prince George on the 8th day, when the road south was clear enough that the tracks of a supply sledge had come through, and the world outside the cabin felt possible again. She thought about her cousin's house, which she had been to once, years ago, and remembered as warm and full of noise. 3 children, a husband who worked the rail lines, a garden in summer, a room she could sleep in, a town with a newspaper office where she might find work. She thought about these things from the fleshing beam, where she was working on a mink pelt with a rhythm she had developed over the past week. Scraper, angle, pressure, follow the grain of the hide, and the thinking felt distant, like something through glass. Cass came in from checking the trap lines, knocked snow off his boots at the door, and stood for a moment watching her work. You're not turning it enough on the downstroke, he said. She adjusted. The scraper moved easier. There, he said. He went to the stove. She heard him pour water. She heard him not leave. Road's clear enough south, he said. I heard the sledge come through, she said. McCarran be coming up in 2 days with supplies. He could take you to the valley junction. She kept working. The mink hide was good quality, better than the first beaver, better than most of what she'd done in the past week. She had been told this without ceremony by a man who did not offer praise easily, and she had filed it away. Sera, he said. She looked up. He was standing with his back to the stove, arms crossed, looking at the floor between them. Whatever he was about to say had cost him something to put into words. She could tell that much. He was not a man who wasted words, but he was also not a man who chose them quickly. The spring trapping's better than fall, he said finally. Better pelts, more of them. I could use someone who knows what they're doing. She looked at him for a moment. I'm learning what I'm doing, she said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. Outside a raven called once, high and clear, the way ravens do when the cold is breaking. She turned back to the hide. She adjusted her grip on the scraper. She followed the grain, the mink. "'You'll need another hour," she said. He went back outside to see to the horse. She worked until the hide was done, then hung it on the drying frame the way he'd shown her, stretched but not strained, enough tension to keep the shape. She stepped back and looked at it, clean, even. Good, she thought, about the cousin. In Prince George, she thought about the newspaper office. She thought about the room in the house full of noise. Then she went to the stove and put another log on the fire because the afternoon was coming and the temperature would drop again. And there was no sense in letting the warmth go out. McCarran came 2 days later with his sledge loaded with flour and salt and a coil of wire and a letter for Cass that he handed over without comment. Cass took it, looked at the return address, set it on the shelf without opening it. McCarran was a short man with red cheeks and very blue eyes, and the particular cheerfulness of someone who spent most of his times alone and became in company almost aggressively pleased about it. So he drank a cup of coffee at the table and talked about the weather and the road conditions and a dispute in the valley about water rights, and Cass listened, and Sera listened and poured more coffee when the cups were low. At some point, McCarran looked at her with a bright, uncomplicated curiosity. "You staying on?" he said. She glanced at Cass. He was looking at the table. "For the spring trapping," she said. McCarran nodded, as if this were a perfectly ordinary piece of information, which perhaps in this part of the country it was. "Good marten country up high in April," he said. "Real good." He left in the late afternoon and they watched the sledge go down the road until the trees took it. Inside, Cass went to the shelf and took down the letter and opened it this time. She watched him read it, 1 page, both sides, and watched his face stay completely still the way faces stay still when they have had practice at receiving news that was expected. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. "Your cousin?" she said. She didn't know why she said it. "My brother," he said. "He's fine. Married again." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She went to the fleshing beam and picked up the scraper. Outside, the light was already going amber. Short days, still, though getting longer by minutes each week now, the way the season changed up here, incremental, and then suddenly, all at once. "Cass," she said. He looked up from where he was sorting through the wire McCarran had brought. "You'll need to show me the trap line," she said. "I don't know where half of them are." He looked at her for a moment. That calculation again, that still assessment. Then something in it resolved into something quieter. "We'll go in the morning," he said, "if the weather holds." "The weather'll hold," she said. She didn't know why she was sure, but she was. She went back to work. He went back to his wire. The stove put its warmth into the room, and the raven called once more outside, closer this time, and then the evening came down over the mountain the way. Evening always did up here. Fast, total, and without apology.